Here is a number that sounds impossible. In one of the richest, most technologically advanced countries on Earth, the average woman now has fewer than one child. Not two, not even one. In 2023, the figure fell to 0.72, the lowest birth rate ever recorded in a modern society. Anywhere, in peacetime, that country is South Korea. And it didn't happen by accident or neglect. Korea saw it coming and fought back, spending more than $280 billion over 2 decades to get its people to have children. The number kept falling anyway. And then, in 2025, something almost no demographer expected happened. It went up. Using data from Statistics Korea, the OECD, and the United Nations, here's what the world's most extreme baby bust is really telling us, and why the rest of Asia is watching nervously. First, understand what the number actually means. Because it's easy to hear, low birth rate, and shrug. Demographers use a measure called the total fertility rate, roughly the average number of children a woman will have over her lifetime. To simply hold a population steady, with no growth at all, you need about 2.1. That's the replacement rate, 2 children to replace 2 parents. Plus a small margin for those who don't survive to adulthood. Most rich countries sit somewhere between 1.3 and 2. The United States is around 1.6. Even Japan, long the poster child for aging societies, is near 1.15. South Korea is in a category of its own. In 2015, its fertility rate was 1.24, already low, but not alarming by developed world standards. Then it fell off a cliff. By 2018 it had dropped below 1, the first major economy ever to do so in peacetime. By 2022 it was 0.78, and in 2023 it bottomed at 0.72. In the capital, Seoul, it was even lower, closer to 0.55. Think about what that compounds into. A fertility rate of 0.7 means that for every 100 Koreans today, the next generation will number only about 35. The one after that, barely a dozen. The raw births tell the same story. In 2012, Korea recorded around 480,000 births. By 2023 that had collapsed to roughly 230,000, cut in half in just over a decade. No war, no famine, no plague did this. It happened in a peaceful, prosperous, democratic country with world-class hospitals. That is what makes Korea the single most important data point in global demographics. So the obvious question is, why? And the answer is not the one the government spent $280 billion betting on. When governments see a falling birth rate, the instinct is to reach for money, and Korea reached harder than almost anyone. Since the mid-2000s, the country has poured more than $280 billion into reversing the decline. Cash bonuses for new babies, expanded parental leave, subsidized childcare, free fertility treatment, housing perks, even government-sponsored matchmaking and dating events. Some cities offered the equivalent of thousands of dollars per child. And the fertility rate fell through all of it. That failure is the most important lesson in the entire story. Because it tells you the problem was never really about money for the baby. It was about the cost of the life around the baby. Start with housing. Seoul has some of the most expensive real estate in the world relative to income, for a young couple. Owning an apartment large enough to raise a child can mean decades of debt. Then there's education. Korea is famous for its private cram schools, the Hagwon, and parents spend enormous sums. Korea routinely ranks at or near the top of the world in private education spending as a share of the economy. Raising one child to adulthood, by some Korean estimates, costs hundreds of thousands of dollars. Much of it on schooling in a brutally competitive race for university places. Add the work culture, among the longest hours in the developed world, and a lingering expectation that a woman who has a child will carry the housework, the childcare, and quietly step back from her career. For a highly educated generation of Korean women, the math is stark. Having a child can mean trading away the career and independence they spent their whole lives building. So they delay, then they decline. A one-time cash bonus does almost nothing against a lifetime of housing debt, education costs, and career sacrifice. That's why the $280 billion didn't move the needle. You cannot subsidize your way out of a problem rooted in how an entire society is built. Which makes what happened next genuinely surprising. After 8 straight years of decline, the number turned. In 2024, South Korea's fertility rate rose for the first time in 9 years, from 0.72 up to 0.75. Small, but the direction shocked people. Then 2025 confirmed it. The rate climbed again to 0.80. A 4-year high and the second consecutive annual increase. The raw births rose to about 254,500 babies, up 6.8% from the year before. The largest annual jump in births since 2010. So what changed? The biggest single driver was marriages. In Korea, births are still overwhelmingly tied to marriage, far more than in the West, so the marriage rate is a leading indicator for births a year or two later. And marriages surge. In 2024, the number of marriages jumped about 15%, the biggest increase since the country started tracking the data back in 1970. Part of that is mechanical. Weddings delayed during the COVID pandemic finally happened, bunching up into a couple of bumper years. But part of it looks real. Surveys picked up a measurable shift in sentiment, with more young Koreans saying they viewed marriage and children positively, alongside an expansion of work, family and childcare policies that may finally be reaching a critical mass. Here's the catch, and it's a big one. 0.80 is still, by an enormous margin, the lowest birth rate in the entire OECD, the club of 38 wealthy nations. It is still barely a third of the 2.1 needed just to keep the population from shrinking. A rebound from catastrophic to merely terrible is still terrible. And demographers warn that a wave of pandemic-delayed weddings can flatter the figures for a year or two and then fade. The honest reading of the 2025 data is this. It is the first genuinely hopeful signal in a decade, but it is not yet an escape. And the deeper problem is that even if every young Korean started having children tomorrow, the country is already locked into decline. To see why, you have to understand demographic momentum. Demographic momentum is the cruel part of this story. The reason a rebound in the birth rate doesn't undo what's already coming. Korea's total population peaked at around 51.7 million and has been edging down since 2020. The first year the country recorded more deaths than births. The working age population, everyone aged 15 to 64, actually started shrinking even earlier, back in 2017. And here's the trap. The generation now entering its 20s and 30s was itself born during the low birth years. So even if each of them chooses to have more children, there are simply fewer potential parents than before. A higher rate applied to a smaller base still produces a shrinking next generation. You can already see the consequences in places most people don't connect to demographics. Take the military. South Korea relies on conscription to field its army against a heavily armed North. But the pool of 20-year-old men available to draft is collapsing, projected to fall from around 226,000 in 2025 to roughly 130,000 by 2040. The active military has already shrunk by about 20% in just 6 years. A country facing one of the world's largest standing armies across its border is running out of soldiers, purely because of births that didn't happen 2 decades ago. The long-range projections are sobering. One Korean think tank, the Korean Peninsula Population Institute for Future, modeled the next century and found that under its median scenario, South Korea's population could fall from about 51 million today to around 11 million by the year 2125, and in the worst case, under 8 million. The same work warns that the ratio of seniors to workers could flip from roughly 30 retirees per 100 working-age people today to as many as 140 per 100 by 2100. That is a society where there are more elderly to support than there are workers to support them, with profound consequences for pensions, healthcare, taxes, and economic growth. This is what makes Korea's number more than a Korean story. Korea is not an outlier. It's the leading edge. Look across East Asia and you see the same curve. Just a few years behind, China's fertility rate has fallen to around 1, and its population has already begun to shrink, a historic turning point for the most populous nation of the modern era. Japan sits near 1.15 and has been aging for decades. Taiwan is below 0.9. Even Singapore, wealthy and well-governed, is under 1. The entire developed corner of Asia is now reproducing at well below replacement. And Korea simply got there first and fell furthest. That's why economists and policymakers everywhere study the Korean number so closely. It is the closest thing we have to a live experiment in what an ultra-low fertility future actually looks like, and what does and doesn't pull a country back. The economic stakes are enormous. Fewer workers means slower growth, a heavier tax burden on each young person, strained pension and healthcare systems, and shrinking domestic markets. For an export powerhouse like Korea, home to Samsung, Hyundai, and the chips the whole world depends on, a shrinking, aging workforce is a direct threat to the model that made it rich. It's no accident that population is now treated as a national security issue in Seoul, and that the government elected this year has made reviving growth and reforming what locals call Korea Inc. a central promise. So watch 3 things from here. First, whether the 2025 rebound holds for a 3rd and 4th year, or fades once the pandemic wedding backlog clears. Second, whether Korea moves beyond cash bonuses to tackle the real drivers, housing, education costs, and work culture. And third, whether the rest of East Asia learns from Korea's $280 billion lesson before they reach the same cliff. The birth rate ticked up, but the deeper question Korea is forcing the world to answer is whether a modern, rich, high-pressure society can make having children feel possible again at all. South Korea spent more than $280 billion to have babies, watched its birth rate fall to the lowest ever recorded, and then saw it tick back up, proof that the trend can bend. But maybe not in time. If you want the numbers shaping Asia's future before they reach the headlines, subscribe to Asia by the Numbers, one big number on the region's economy. Every week, data over noise. Which country do you think faces the toughest demographic future? Tell us below. See you in the next one.